Hello there, Mad Mike here, and welcome back to the channel. And today I want to go over something that I probably should have done yesterday, but I wound up being busy last night, and I was busy for most of today, so I'm going to make the video now, and that is, yesterday we got news of the passing of actor John Saxon, who passed away at the age of 83. Now, some people may not realize who John Saxon is by name. Obviously, his picture is going to be on the screen, but John Saxon was an actor that I actually really enjoyed. I thought that he could definitely play certain types of roles. A lot of the times he played kind of a gray character. He was a character that may have done bad things at various points, or kind of seedy or scummy things, but in the end, he was still trying to do good things, or he was doing those bad things for what was a relatively good reason. And over the course of his career, he really had kind of two stages to his career. His early stages, which is where he was kind of a teen heartthrob. He was this fresh young face, and a lot of people really liked him. He had a couple big hits back then, a series of films really. That started with Rock Pretty Baby and also followed up with Summer of Love, where he played the same character. And that really propelled him into that kind of teen stardom. But that was in the 1950s. I'm not really super familiar with either of those films, other than, John Saxon was in them and by name, and they were successful. But then afterwards is really when he started to develop into his mainstream career. But the thing is, I'm more familiar with him from his later career, from his horror work, for the most part, rather than his early stuff, except for really what I would consider to be the end of his early career, which was Bruce Lee's Enter the Dragon. And John Saxon plays the character of Roper in that film. And I really, really, really like his character because he's a good contrast between Bruce Lee and the villain, because Bruce Lee's character is he's this Zen master, he's full of wisdom, he's an amazing fighter, he's the hero of the story. But John Saxon is kind of that dude who's just like, he knows he's kind of he in every other circle except for the circle he's in currently in that film, when he goes to the fighting island, he knows he's a badass. He knows he can get any chick he wants. He's kind of like, he reminds me a little bit of a James Bond type in that film in terms of the attitude that he presents. He's very confident. Actually, maybe not James Bond because he's not really proper. He's kind of maybe a little more like a Fonzie. He's extremely confident. And I love that there's a scene where they go through and all of the fighters get to pick basically from these prostitutes that this madam brings in. This madam who's, all the prostitutes are Asian, but the madam is Caucasian. She's white. And she goes to John Saxon's room and she asks him, what girl he would like to choose, and he says, "I've already chosen," and he's looking at the madam. And that you have to have some balls to go for that one. I just love the character of Roper in that film because he's the sleazier version of Bruce Lee, basically. He's a guy that, if he put his mind to it in that film, he probably, in terms of the character, he could have been just as much of a badass as Bruce Lee, but he just decided to fuck off and bang chicks and do cool stuff and steal money from people, because at the beginning of it, he gets stalked on a golf course and he beats the shit out of all these people on a golf course, which is pretty funny. But I really liked him in that. That's really one of his major roles, but that's my favorite role from his early filmography. And that's kind of the end of his early filmography, because he would do Enter the Dragon, and Joe Kidd was around that time too, where he played Louis Chima. That's the other thing, is a lot of the times they would race swap him, which was kind of interesting when you knew that the name John Saxon came up and he was playing a guy named Louis Chima, so he's obviously if he is Latino, it wasn't from his father's side, or he's using a stage name or something. Because it was kind of funny seeing him in various roles. I think near the end of his career, he was also in a Genghis Khan movie. So they used to do that because he had very tan skin. He could pass as certain ethnicities. And he was also a fairly well-established actor at the time. Now, just a year after Enter the Dragon, I think is really when he started his later career, because that was when he was Lieutenant Fuller in Black Christmas. Now, Black Christmas, again, for people who don't know that, it's considered one of the very first slasher movies. It actually predates Halloween by 4 years. And it's a story about this psycho who's living in this women's sorority house, and he's killing these girls one by one. Really good movie. I'd recommend it wholeheartedly for anybody that likes slasher films. But basically, John Saxon is playing a very similar character to what he would play later on in A Nightmare on Elm Street for Wes Craven. So it's almost an identical character, which I think is kind of funny. But he does play that well, especially later on in his career. He played very well the authority figure or the cop character. Which is, again, it kind of differs from a lot of his early characters, where he was kind of a sleazy guy, where he's more of an authority figure and stuff like that. It showed that he did have some range, which I thought was a good thing. Now, moving into the middle part of his career, I should say middle to later part of his career after Black Christmas, was when he started doing kind of a lot of kind of horror-related films. Some of them, stuff that really wasn't too mainstream. I remember him from one particular, which I actually really, really liked from the early 80s, called Tenebrae. It was done by Dario Argento. It was one of his giallos, which I actually really, really enjoy. Tenebrae. I would put it up there with Deep Red as far as a movie of his that I honestly love. And John Saxon, again, kind of plays this sleazy guy who's sleeping with the main character's girlfriend, and he's also his publicist and stuff. And this is also well into the fact that John Saxon had lost his hair, which is another kind of funny story. I guess I'll get when I get to the Nightmare on Elm Street role of Lieutenant Donald Thompson. But when you look at him in Tenebrae, it's kind of funny. And then the death scene that he has in Tenebrae is so bizarre, and it reminds me so much of Italian horror because there's almost no sound in it. Except I think you do hear him scream when he starts getting stabbed, but he's getting stabbed like literally in the middle of public with people around. It's like, somebody's going to see that. But again, I kind of like that idea. It's a weird kind of hiding in plain sight type of thing where it's just a quick stab, and then he falls on the ground and he's bleeding and he winds up dying there. But like I said, that was one of his more memorable roles for me because I'm a very big Argento fan. But then you go into really, I think, what his most recognizable role was later in his career, which was Nightmare on Elm Street, which he would reprise that role for Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors, and he would come back and semi-play the character and also play himself in Wes Craven's New Nightmare, which was the last of that original series, the meta film, basically. But I like him in Nightmare on Elm Street because he's the polar opposite of Nancy's character. Or even from most characters in that film, he's the straight guy he's the guy that kind of looks at the situation in a black and white type of mentality, where there's a right and a wrong, and if something, he's not willing to believe that there's actually a lunatic who hunts you in your dreams and murders you in your dreams, and then but that kills you in real life. He doesn't believe that. He thinks there's somebody just running around murdering teenagers, which would be the case if this was any normal slasher movie, but it's a Nightmare on Elm Street. So he's kind of that character that's very grounded in reality in this fantastical story, and I liked that about him, and that he could play that very well, where he was stubborn to the point where he knows this isn't possible. He knows this can't happen, and even though he's seeing things that most people would consider to be, fantastical and insane in some cases, especially with the Glenn murder, he's not willing to believe that it wasn't just a regular person that somehow managed to do this. Actually, really, until the Glenn murder, he really doesn't consider it until, after that. Then he starts trying to think about that. And then at the end of the movie, he finally basically comes to the conclusion about what happened. And about that his daughter was right, and that basically him ignoring that, caused a lot of problems and caused the death of his ex-wife and her mother. That's carried over into Nightmare on Elm Street 3, where he sacrifices himself, and then also with the fact that, he does actually kind of play a good job where he's trying to be where Freddy disguises himself as him to finally get Nancy at the end. But I love Nightmare on Elm Street 3 with him, too, because it shows that his character was able to progress, even though it was kind of a regression in terms of, he doesn't become a better character, he becomes a worse character in terms of his demeanor and stuff, because now he's just a worthless drunk. He's not even a cop anymore. But, again, the stipulations of the story kind of makes sense. In addition to the fact they really never acknowledged that Nightmare 2 happened. But, that's just kind of an interesting role that I always really liked him in. Was playing that character, and the thing is, I liked John Saxon as an actor. He was one of those guys. He wasn't necessarily always in the limelight, after the early part of his career. And actually, that's something that Wes Craven actually mentioned when they had him in for an interview about when he hired John Saxon to come in for the job. And he basically, this whole thing, because the woman who played Nancy's mother in the film was also off of Dallas. So, they were people that were known. Moviegoers knew their faces to an extent. But the thing is, he could get them for cheap, basically, because they were kind of past their prime in terms of the public outcry for wanting them in more films, or they weren't in demand. But when John Saxon actually came in, John Saxon came in with a suitcase, and the suitcase actually had two toupees in it, because he had gone bald by that point. And he said, "Which one would you rather have me wear?" And if I remember correctly, I believe that John Saxon does not wear a toupee in that film. I think they just left him bald to keep him like middle-aged. And for the most part, that's kind of how he finished off his career, which again is a little bit, sad, because he did have a decent set of hair when he was younger, and he even had, unless he was using some kind of a, hair plugs or a toupee or something in Enter the Dragon, he still had hair there too. But he dabbled in stuff on the small screen too. Not a whole lot of anything that's really kind of big. He had bit roles on a lot of shows back then: Starsky and Hutch, Bonanza, stuff like that. Basically a lot of stuff that people had on there. He was also a mainstay on the $6 Million Man for a while. He was a big side character on that. So he did transition a little bit over to the small screen, but for a majority of it, he was a film actor. That's what a lot of people remember him from. But again, if you're a little older, maybe you remember him a bit more from those '50s films where he was a bigger name. But like I said, people that are around my age in their late 20s, early 30s would probably remember him more from the Nightmare series, from Black Christmas, from Enter the Dragon, stuff like that. So, but I want to know what you think. Do you put in the comments below? What was your favorite John Saxon film or role? Or television appearance if you choose to go that route. Or anything like that. Put that in the comments below. As usual, I like to know what you're thinking. Hit the bell for notifications, hit the like button, subscribe, and remember, I live my life free of compromise. Do you?